Thank you for being here. It's been some time that we have sat together and talked about things in common, so to speak. How have you been?
Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah.
Been well.
Yes. Let's talk. We talked in the last century, so now we are in the 21st century, and I think it would be appropriate to see how we are up to the challenges of 21st century. And perhaps identify them from a Muslim perspective.
The challenges that we're facing
Yes,
as a community.
as a community.
I think probably the greatest challenge right now that we're facing is the dominant global culture, the globalization, which is in reality westernization, and the widespread impact that the media, overall all media, not simply the television, but films, television, electronic media, newsprint, and magazines, books, that all what this is having, the impact that it's having on culture. If you take India, for example, India, which is a reasonably conservative culture traditionally, with what this country would call conservative values. What's happening in Indian media is unbelievable.
Yeah, Bollywood is going ballistics. Yes.
That they can produce the films that they're producing, the pornography, because for Muslims, pornography is not what this culture would call soft core or hardcore. It is any displays of gratuitous nudity and sexual displays that are inappropriate for family viewing.
It's interesting that you've said two things which are quite important conceptually. One is this term that is being brandished in the media and being used, globalization, and then you have also commented on the media, which perhaps is a vehicle for homogenizing all cultures and beating them into a pulp of globalization. How do you see that?
Well, I think it's an accurate description. It is a vehicle. It's Dawkins, the evolutionist biologist from England, talks about memes as opposed to genes, and memes are ideas that infect the host consciousness, and once they begin to spread, like a gene, they become part. They replicate, and they're transferred to the next generation. And this is what I think the media does very effectively, is that it implants these memes into the consciousness of people where they were not there prior to that. And for the Muslims, because we already have a very clear understanding of the world, to pollute that understanding of the world by giving our opening our minds to very alien ideas, cultures, and I'm not speaking about in some way against cultural interpenetration, the benefit of cultures, but this is not benefit. This is an onslaught. It's we're being literally attacked, and I would say not just the Muslims. I think the American people, the European people, I think people of good will all over the world are feeling this onslaught. They're feeling it in their lives and in their children.
Yeah, but to set the stage right for globalization or without globalization, with or without the media, but the question that we need to examine is whether or not the general intellectual climate prevailing in Islamic countries is going to be able to allow us to evolve in societies which are consistent with the Quranic and the Quranic or two traditions of Islam.
Right.
How do you see that?
Well, there's no, I mean, first of all, in my own experience, I would say there isn't much of an intellectual climate, which is a serious problem. In the Muslim world, generally, you have two types of people. You have I mean, I don't want to make that stereotype, but I would say that what you find amongst educated people, you will get people that are educated in the secular world, and then people that are educated in the religious world. And there are very few people that have really been able to make a bridge between those two worlds and understand the world of the 21st century, and at the same time have a deep rooting in their own tradition and their own understanding. There's very few people that have done that. I've met maybe 3 or 4 in my life as a Muslim. On the other hand, those people that are in the secularized world, in the Muslim world, some of the most brilliant intellects have gone to science and engineering, medicine, things like this. You rarely find people that have a real genius that are directed towards the humanities, directed towards philosophy, directed towards aspects of history, aspects of human society that are absolutely essential to create an intellectual milieu that will enable serious thought to take place.
You see, that really what you are identifying and what we need to reflect upon is that truly when in the great tradition of early Islam, which went back to Greeks, which went back to all the humanities, which synthesized everything, distilled everything, and then packaged everything, and the West benefited from it. And here we are sitting back in the 21st century. There's been a sort of a vacuum or an intellectual drought for the last how many 100 years?
Well, I wouldn't say it's been several hundred years. I think that the Muslims were intellectually active 150 years ago. I really believe that. And I think even into the early part of the 20th century, there were some very brilliant people. One of them was the Mufti of the Ottoman Empire, the last Mufti, Shaykh al-Sabri. He was a genius, and his book on philosophy it's a masterpiece. It should be translated into English. I think we did have intellectuals, but unfortunately, the wave of secularism, and because of the fact that those intellectuals were so deeply rooted in a traditional culture and really weren't prepared for the incredible onslaught that was taking place. I think when they were hit by the West, and it begins when Napoleon's invasion of Egypt, that's when the heartland was hit. I mean, you had the Crusades, but the Crusades, this was like a thrust, and it did last for a period of time, but it had actually absolutely no impact on the vast majority of the Muslim world. It really didn't. People don't realize that, but the Crusades were isolated in that way. They weren't affecting the Indians, they weren't affecting the Indonesians, but they did affect Palestine and Syria and Lebanon. However, when Napoleon entered into Egypt, this is the beginning of the end, and I think the Muslims, beginning of the end of their sovereignty, and they were very aware of that because they were unable to defend the heartland, and so I think the ulama were traumatized. The scholars of Islam, they were traumatized, and they weren't able really to respond in a way that reinvigorated the ummah.
Yes. I think as much as you are alluding also to that whole experience of colonialism, or being under colonial subjugation for the entire Muslim world, which lasted through, last couple of centuries, to say the least. Now we are free, so-called. But still, you look at the stagnation of societies, you look at how stratified we have become, and then you wonder.
One of the foundations of Western civilization is a book called the Iliad, which was attributed to Homer, and it's about a war that lasted over a decade. And by the end of it, the Greeks decided that they couldn't keep doing this, so they devised a strategy. And the plan was to build a horse, and they would take their ships out, leave this huge horse, and take their ship out and leave it off. Well, the horse was actually filled with Greek soldiers, and the Trojans brought it in to the city walls, and they thought it was a gift from the Greeks who had now departed and left them, and only one woman, Cassandra, who attempted to warn them, but nobody listened to her. At night, they all got drunk, and the Greeks came down, the ships returned, they opened the doors, and they massacred the society. I think there's a beautiful metaphor there for colonialism, because what the colonialists did when they quote-unquote retreated from the Muslim lands, they had made a Trojan horse, and it was basically a system of governance and a system of education that would ensure that the interest of the colonialists would be maintained long after they departed, but without being taxed by the financial burden
yes.
of colonialism.
Yes.
So I think colonialism is alive and well in the Muslim world.
So that it is now hegemony of ideas which the West has left behind.
I think so. I think if you colonize the mind, I mean, for 100 years ago, the Muslim bodies were colonized, but their minds weren't colonized
No, but
yet.
then you're admitting that if it is the hegemony of ideas, on the plane of ideas, we have had nothing to offer.
Well, I think there's a bankruptcy. Yeah, that is true. I think one of the tragedies of modern Muslim discourse is there's always this idea, Islam is the solution, Islam is the solution, blah, blah, blah. Where's the plan?
Where's the proof?
Where's the proof? You have to put up or shut up, like they say in the West. Mm-hmm. There's no evidence. Most Muslims don't even know what Islam is. Mm-hmm. They know the slogan. They know they're supposed to say that, but do they really understand the Sharia? Do they understand the economic plan that Muslim scholars have set out to rejuvenate societies? Very few Muslims know any of this stuff. I think there's more of an emotional type of allegiance to Islam than there is an intellectual, and the tragedy of that is that emotions are very easily manipulated.
Right.
And this is what happens in the Muslim world constantly. Mm-hmm. Muslims are manipulated. You can get them up into a fury and have them burning the American flag or doing this, and
reactive.
It's all reactive.
Yes.
There's no intelligence behind it.
Okay. No, setting aside those knee-jerk responses, would you say then that psychologically and intellectually we have been so scarred that we have not been able to formulate anything of substance to stem this overpowering?
Yeah, I don't know if it's scarring. I would say it's more like post-traumatic stress syndrome. I think that what happens when people have major traumas, I mean, it's a very interesting phenomenon, trauma, and I think that, I don't think it's just the Muslims. I think the whole world is in a traumatic state. I think that industrialization and the technological society have happened so quickly and have so radically altered life on this planet as it was known for millennia. Human beings they're in trauma, and they're in a lot of denial. I mean, that's one of the things about trauma victims is that they say, I'm fine, leave me alone. And they're not. I mean, I think the West is they look a little better than the Muslims. The Muslims look pretty pathetic. But I would say, in most ways, the Muslims are actually a lot better off than the West.
Well, anyway.
I really believe that. I'll give you an example.
Yes.
In the West, if you go to a Muslim country, they're dirty. Right? And Western people, they get really bothered by that. Like there's garbage and people just throw things around. To me, that's a sick person whose symptoms are showing. In this country, everything looks clean, but where's the garbage going? The production of garbage in this country is at such staggering levels. They're running out of landfills. So it looks very nice on the outward, and the Muslim world looks really bad on the outward, right? But over here, it's all hidden. Nobody knows there's a problem because every week this garbage guy shows up and takes all the garbage and hides it.
No, I think in what you have alluded to, you certainly have made a point that the ideas here or the society has gone to the other extreme, and for which really an average American who thinks like us is also mortified. I mean, they admit that this is what is happening. But
well, I think people are in a delusional state. I mean, I'll just give you an example on the same theme. If you look at the Muslim world, we have, most of the countries are tyrannies. You have this control model, dictatorial. It's pathetic. I mean, some of them actually have, I mean, they're basically just mafiosa that have taken over the country, and they're running it like a mafia gang runs a turf. On the other hand, if you look at the West, it looks pretty good, you know, but the truth is, if you look at the corporate hegemony in this country, if you look at the almost absolute power that corporations have on government here, it's tyranny of another name. It's more pleasant. I mean, Malcolm X used to use the analogy of the house Negro and the field Negro, and I would say that Americans, we're house Negroes. It's nicer, we eat better food, we wear better clothes, we're still slaves. I mean, out there in the quote-unquote third world, they're field blacks.
Yes.
That's what they are, but we're still living in a slave system. Yeah. People are wage slaves. They're slaves of fear. I mean, you have Newsweek and Time showing people, are you scared yet? I mean, that's a headline to create this sense of economic fear. They're always worried about losing their jobs. Well, what they did is they took away from these people the initiative and the ability to work for themselves, made them employees of multinational corporations, and then keep them in this panic state, a fear state.
Well, whereas, I think that is the ultimate.
You don't have that in the Muslim world.
Yes, but
I mean, Muslims, despite the fact that economically there's a lot of terrible conditions, on the other hand, Muslims generally, and this has been my experience living in the Muslim world, Muslims have a general trust in the creation. They don't have that same anxiety of provision that people here do. The levels of stress in a lot of the Muslim countries, and this is my experience of living amongst Muslims, in living in North Africa, in living in the Middle East. I really believe that.
Well, I think I would slightly disagree with you.
That's
that
fine.
The level of stress you think is lesser there. No, the level of stress is of a different kind and is equally compelling when I look at a newspaper showing the Afghan refugee problem, or other problems for which we bear the moral responsibility.
No, we don't. I don't believe that. See, who created the Afghan refugee party? It does create it.
Where does
it does matter.
Say,
Dr. Khaja, it matters deeply. Afghanistan now, everybody laughs at Afghanistan. Everybody makes fun of the Taliban. Nobody looks at 20 years of absolute tyranny.
That is our duty
at the hand. No, hold on. Just hold on. Nobody looks at the fact that Afghanistan was simply one little checker space in a game between Russia and between America.
Yes,
two superpowers that trampled upon a people that were living in a relatively peaceful existence. I mean, Afghanis, they're good people. They're generous people. They're noble people. Many good qualities about the Afghanis. There are some things that we don't like about the Afghani culture. Well, there's plenty of things I don't like about many cultures. But the point is, generally, they were a functional culture with a great tradition and proud people, men and women. Now, there are people that have been, in 20 years of war, an entire generation grown up. Do you see? So it's very easy to point the finger at those people, but I feel
I'm not pointing the fingers at them. I'm pointing the fingers at the whole Muslim Ummah. I'm saying that we are in no condition. We allow this to happen on the first instance because of our own impotence. And then when we have a problem, we say, well, this is not our problem. This was a created problem, so we have no responsibility. I'm bringing that question right back to us, and I'm saying that this is our responsibility.
I think the responsibility, I mean, for me as an American, you see, I mean, you immigrated to this country, and you're an American by immigration. For me as an American, growing up in this country, as somebody that converted to Islam, you know, I would say that we hold a deep responsibility as Americans. Do you see? I believe that. I would say for an Afghani, I think that it's you know, victims are volunteers, like they say. You always need a volunteer to be a victim. I think victimization is a terrible psychological space to be in, and I don't think that the Afghanis should look at it like that. But I think personally, we need to bring some onus of responsibility here to this country.
Yes, of course.
And I think Americans need to be reminded of that fact, that we do have a moral responsibility, that the way the world is being run, there is responsibility in this country, because this country has massive interests in the Muslim world. And for that reason, this country's foreign policy supports some of the worst elements of the Muslim societies,
Absolutely.
maintains their power, sells them weapons, and then when they get out of control, bomb them into non-existence, and then tell us that they're the bad guys.
No,
Muslims are not producing armaments anywhere. There's no Muslim country right now that is producing any serious level of armaments. The Egyptians produce some very poorly functional Kalashnikov.
No, Pakistan is producing.
And Pakistan produces. I mean, by and large, no Muslim country is producing fighter pilot jets.
They can't afford to.
Whether
That's
they
the
can
whole point.
afford it or not,
No, but
they can afford to buy them.
That is the.
They can afford to buy
that
them.
is
Who's
the
selling them? Who's selling them?
No question. When you say that no other country except the United States and the West is building up this arms arsenal.
That's true.
You're right.
China is another, but Japan is not. Japan is I mean, it's in their treaty with America. They don't develop. The only countries that are developing weapons seriously are the communists, the ex-communist quote unquote countries, China and the West. The Muslims are not doing that. And yet Muslims are blamed for using all the weapons.
Well, they are.
Because they're sold to them, and then wars are set up to get them fighting each other. And I agree, the Muslims should be more intelligent than to fall into these traps. At the same time, I don't want to hear the West preaching to me. As a Western person who's educated and understands this, as a Western person who's educated and understands this, I don't want them preaching to me about how terrible these people are over there, because this country has no moral authority to do that. And I would agree that the Muslims, right now in their present condition, have no moral authority either. And that is why, in a sense, globally, if you want to talk about the challenge of this century, our challenge is, how do we redeem ourselves? Not just as Muslims, as human beings. How does this planet redeem itself from the conditions that it finds itself in? And I think the Muslims are one segment of the human family.
And certainly Muslims in this equation of globalization, they are not the ones who are going to rule, because once this whole idea of one world as is being created, it is decidedly the West which has the hegemony of resources. And it
doesn't have the hegemony of resources, it has the hegemony of the exploitation of resources.
And of the ideas.
Vast majority of resources are in the Muslim world.
And of the ideas, yes, the ideas to control.
I mean, material resources are in the Muslim world. And in fact, a lot of the intellectual, I mean, this country has a massive importation of intellect. I mean, some of the best and brightest, and you're among them. From the Muslim world, no, seriously, you're an educated doctor that works at high levels of professionalism in this country, and yet you're a Muslim from Pakistan. They brought you to this country. They didn't have to let you into this country, but they wanted what you had to offer this country.
But I came here because of
your
the
skill.
freedom and the opportunity.
Whatever reasons you came here, that's fine. I'm not interested in that. My point is, this country imports some of the best and brightest intellects from all over the world and leaves those countries impoverished. Now you can say, well, those countries don't provide the freedom that I need to express myself or to live fully or something like that. Life is a struggle.
Yeah, but
how are we going to change those countries if the best of those countries abandon those countries and come to this country and then start pointing fingers at those countries and tell us how terrible they are?
I think I concede to you the argument that the best of us out there are here. And
well, I wouldn't say the best in terms of spiritually or morally, but I would say certainly the brightest, some of the best and brightest in terms of education and secular education in particular.
I agree with that, but the fact of the matter is, if somebody was to suggest to you that the most powerful ideas originating from the West during the last century, and you may disagree with that, are democracy and human rights. And that itself
I totally disagree with that.
I know you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the biggest lie that's ever been perpetrated on. First of all, democracy is the worst form of government, according to Plato, outside of tyranny. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the one right before tyranny, the demos. I mean, democracy, they're the ones that condemn Socrates to death. Right, so much for democracy. Democracy in the eyes of some of the most brilliant philosophers of human history. democracy is this country. How many people voted this year?
Well, yes.
40%? 40%? How many elected the president? 17%? 18%?
We are dissecting the processes now. We are not really...
No, but democracy has never existed. It's a lie. You've never had the rule of a people. You've had the rule of an elect. This country was founded as a republic. That's why the Electoral College exists, to make sure that nobody gets into power that wasn't meant to get into power.
Right.
So a crisis in democracy, according to their own theorists, is when the people actually start getting involved in politics seriously, like what happened in the 1960s, when you had serious political dissent in this country, and yet those so-called democratic forces in this country mobilized with everything they had in their arsenal to completely fragment political dissent in this country that was grassroots and widespread. People were eliminated. Some of the best voices of that generation were assassinated. And most of those assassinations, no, seriously.
No, seriously, one of the things.
So
those statistics,
they can talk about democracy, but whether it exists or not is another thing. As a concept, the rule of the people, as a concept.
I was coming to it.
I would say first,
people's government, a representative government,
a representative government,
a process that will give people their rights.
Islam had that 1,400 years ago.
No, when you say that democracy does not exist, are you saying that an Islamic state ever existed?
I think an Islamic state, I don't like that word, but I would say Islamic governance has existed historically.
Some form of Islamic governance.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And I would say it existed at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. It existed during the four Khulafa, Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, and then you had it with just rulers that existed in different parts of the world.
From then on, we have had...
It was fragmented. It's never been...
rules. We have had despots. We have had one record.
Well, Shaykh Uthman Dan Fodio, who founded the Sokoto government, was definitely an example of a governance according to the prophetic tradition. And I think you could argue that there were certain rulers in India during the period of, they were dynastic nonetheless, but I think that there was a high level of benevolence towards, I mean, I think government is always, at best, it can be benign. I don't think that governance is a human problem. I mean, we have human beings that need to live and function together, so that when you bring in that element of government, there's always inherent dangers in that. And I think even within the Islamic tradition, government, there's a real serious suspicion of governance in Islam.
Well,
because the nature of governance, the nature of power. I mean, this is Chesterton, all these power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And also powerlessness corrupts, and absolute powerlessness corrupts absolutely. It works both ways. Human beings are complicated, and I think that government is a serious human problem. We have never had an ideal government. I do not believe in utopianism. I think Muslims that believe in an Islamic state as this utopian, perfect society is an illusion. It is a lie. And the reason that we don't believe in utopia is because this world was meant to be a struggle. It was never meant to be a place where we all get complacent, feel comfortable, and think everything's fine. No, there's a lot of problems out there, and that's what jihad is about. Engaging the world, struggling to make it better, but recognizing that it will always have its inherent flaws.
So then you are really coming back to an evolutionary process that needs to occur on the strength of the core of the ideology that Islam expounds for us.
Well, I wouldn't use the word ideology, because I don't think Islam is an ideology.
Well,
ideology is actually a
basis.
No, I don't think so. It's not an idea. Ideas are created.
Well, that's a matter of semantics.
God doesn't have ideas. Well, it's important. God doesn't have fikr.
Well, no.
In Arabic, the word idea is fikr, and God is not mufakkir.
Well, I don't know why the idea should be translated into fikr when, same as why...
Idea. No, it's a Greek word. It's a Greek word.
No, but why, as much as deen is translated into religion, which doesn't really...
I mean, Islam is an understanding. I would accept that, but not an ideology. Ideology is horrible. Ideologues are the worst types of people.
Well, I couldn't disagree with it.
They're the worst types of people, ideologues. And that's what a lot of Muslims have become. They've taken Islam as an ideology. It's become like a political ideology. We've got all these Muslim Zionists out there. They're just like Jews.
Wait a minute.
The Zionist
what do you mean
Jews.
Muslim Zionists?
There are Jews. There's an element within the Jewish community that takes Judaism as a political ideology. And that's the only goal in Judaism for them, is to bring about a Jewish state called Israel. Right? It's not a religious, they don't have religious goals like Herzl and these people. They were purely political animals. You find within the Muslim communities, you find people that Islam has become a vehicle to power, to government power.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the point I'm making. I'm saying that Islam, as it exists now, has become a tool for social and political control.
Absolutely, which is horrible.
And therefore we are not able to evolve.
Yeah, because the whole point of Islam is, the word means submission. You're giving up control.
Yeah.
That's the whole point. People don't realize the Prophet ﷺ he was so far from a dictator. He was so far from a tyrant. He as far as you can go on this earth, he was that. When he was once planning a battle, a man said to him, is this opinion, Ya Rasulullah, or is it revelation? He said, no, it's opinion. Yes. He said, well, then we should do this. And he said, that's a better opinion. What ruler now in the Muslim world would listen to an advisor like that? And this is why that's why the war was lost in Germany, because his best generals were unable to disagree with him because he was such a tyrant. And this is the stupidity of tyranny. Aristotle says tyrants by nature surround themselves with yes men. They can't be around people that will challenge their ideas and thoughts. And there's an intellectual tyranny in the Muslim world now. I mean, Muslims have become not just, because they've incorporated tyranny as a model. And so mosques become tyrannical centers where you have these petty little despots. They're despots, and they control the mosque with their iron hand. Anybody that disagrees with them, and they have the yes men around them. Some of them don't even say yes, they just nod.
That's correct. As we are looking at the challenges that we are facing for the 21st century from the Muslim perspective, we have so far almost given up as far as any effort that we see on the horizon in the Muslim world to get us up to snuff with those challenges. Am I correct?
Well, I'd have to agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah. And so we are here now. And
we're here.
And now, from my perspective, which you may disagree, I feel that we are here where there is freedom and there is knowledge. The two essential, sort of compelling reasons for being a Muslim.
Right.
And sort of...
Well, I mean, we need to, first of all,
what do we do is
we need to define terms.
Okay.
If we define what is freedom, in the English language we say freedom from and freedom to.
Yes.
Freedom to do what I want, freedom from this or that. Now,
we have both here.
I don't agree. See, because from an Islamic perspective, there's two types of people. There's a free man and a slave. And a free man is somebody who transcends his bestial nature and is able to take moral control of his character. And as long as human beings are unable to do that, they're in abject servitude to themselves. And I would say America is one of the most extraordinary slave societies that has ever existed, because you have a society of people that their lives are dictated by their passions, self-indulgence. People in this country have no discipline with food anymore. There was a time in this country when you ate 3 meals a day. Now people snack all day long. And then their children are overweight. People have to get their stomachs stapled so that I mean, is that freedom?
I think Isaiah Berlin had...
Is that freedom, though? Would you call those people free people?
No, I mean freedom in the sense...
Political freedom?
In the sense of being able to exercise your own rights. But here, we have a little difference. Here, the rights are exercised without the responsibilities attached to the rights.
Well, we have a Bill of Rights, but we don't have a Bill of Responsibilities. And I think that's a big flaw in the Constitution.
Well, I think the charter of liberty that the Constitution or Bill of Rights is, it really lays out a general plan, obviously.
And most of it's in accordance with Islam. I don't have a problem. The majority of the Constitution I have no problem with.
Right.
Really. And the Bill of Rights, I think, it's the best the intellect can do.
Right. So that's what it is in America. It's the best that can do.
But do you think the Constitution is being applied in the United States of America right now? Do you think the Fourth Amendment is being applied?
Is being lived in the Muslim world?
Well, I don't think anybody in the Muslim world, as far as I know, is claiming that it does.
Well, no.
Whereas I would say
I disagree.
No.
I think I will show you headlines from papers where claims.
There is no country on this planet. There might be crackpots, individuals, but as a people, there is no Muslim people that I know of that would say we live in a land where the laws of Islam are being applied. Even the majority of the laws of Islam. In fact, a Moroccan scholar told me once, I asked him about Buddhism, and he said that he felt Buddha was probably a prophet. And he said, and I'll tell you something else. If the Moroccans applied Buddha's teaching today, they would be closer to Islam than what they're on right now. That's what he told me. So I don't think anybody in the Muslim world claims. Yet Americans, by and large, believe that the Constitution is being applied in this country. And yet 30 million people's phones are being tapped. And that's something that is not conspiracy theory. That is in their own major publications. They admit to that fact.
The trap here.
People are being monitored. Every time you buy something with your credit card, there's a database in Oklahoma that's doing a psychological buy-up on you to see what kind of person you are.
Yes.
And then to determine what type of things we're going to send you in the mail so we can pinpoint. Yes. So you'll start getting things because you read a lot of intellectual books. So you'll get Levenger will send you things because you're an intellectual person, so you can have nice pens and things like that. I mean, is that freedom? Do you think you're free if you're... The only free place I've ever been to in my life is the Sahara Desert. The only free people I've ever met are the Bedouin in Mauritania. And that's the God's honest truth. I'm not exaggerating. And you can go there and see for yourself. They're free people. They can go where they want. If they don't pay the bills, their tent's not going to be taken away from them.
Well, you see, you're taking...
In this country, if you don't pay your taxes, they'll take your house from you.
Let us be fair. You are taking an extreme position in this because if you...
I don't think it's extreme. I think everything out there is so extreme that a moderate position sounds very extreme.
If you look at the so-called perfect solutions to the woes of humanity or the evolutionary process, you will always find that eventually they all have a failure point or they all have a shortcoming. I mean, this is a sociological phenomenon.
Well, I think implementation. I mean, Islam, I would say Islam, the Quran says quite clearly that Islam is kamil, it's perfect. And I believe that. But human application of Islam will always be flawed by human nature.
Yeah,
but there's no doubt. Because human nature has certain elements in it. We're triune creatures. Our brains are designed in a way that we have mechanisms operating in us that oftentimes are actually to our detriment. Fight or flight syndrome is a problem because you can start dealing with people very aggressively, and there's no need to. But your physiology has taken over, and it's overridden your own rational component.
So that's what is happening here.
Where?
Right? In America. The physiology, you're driven by desire, you're driven by...
Well, I think desires are created.
You're saying that the freedom...
I think desires are created, and that's why I don't believe the people here are free. I feel sorry for people out there. When I go out there and look, those people driving on those freeways every day in Los Angeles, those people are free to go where you want. You can't even get off the freeway if you wanted to. Is that freedom? I mean, it used to be if you were on a road, you could turn around, do 180 degree. I would say that was freedom.
But then that would be anarchy.
That's not anarchy. That's the way America used to be. I grew up in a time when, and I'm not that old, but I grew up in a time in the Bay Area when you could get off the freeway. There wasn't gridlock for 2 or 3 hours every day. I mean, the people look at. Systematic and orderly. I mean, what are we, ants?
Of our culture, of our behavior?
You know, are we going to operate like the ant hill, where everybody just does? Well, this is what they want, and the queen bee, Citibank, and Coca-Cola, and all these other multinational corporations, they just dictate to the drones. That's what we are. We're drones.
Major corporations of the world, control 80% of the
There you go. So is that freedom? But is that freedom?
No, but that is...
Do we have economic freedom when 80% of the wealth is controlled by less than 5% of the population in this country? Is that freedom? When Helmsley can say only the little people pay taxes, and then the big people punish her for spilling the beans by making her pay taxes.
Scenario, you're taking the
I don't think it's
middle class America pays taxes. You and I pay taxes.
Yeah, but rich people don't pay taxes. Corporations get welfare. Yeah, corporations are on welfare. They're complaining about black people in Watts, and the biggest multinational corporations in this country are being subsidized. They complain about Mexican people. Abuses. This is written into the system.
We don't even have a system. These are abuses.
It's written into the system. They're not abuses.
Well, I think, you see, the point is that is the freedom, that this system evolves freely. In the process, you are seeing some of the dark side of it, and that needs to be corrected. You have the freedom to do that. Whereas, where in the world outside do you see that?
I just don't believe there's freedom in this country.
Okay, so we have a disagreement.
I mean, I would say, and to be fair, I would say, in my experience in the world, and I really mean this, the freest place I've been was in the Sahara Desert, and I mean that. And I would say that in America, there is a modicum of freedom.
At least I got you to that point.
Right.
So
no, I'll say that. There is a freedom for us to talk. In a lot of countries in the world, we can't even have this discussion.
Yes.
And I accept that. There's a freedom also for dissent in this country, although if the dissent gets to a level where it becomes actually a threat to the overall structure of this society, that dissent is usually eliminated with extreme prejudice. Assassination is part and parcel of every political power on this planet. There is no political power that does not eliminate opponents, including this country. They eliminate internally and externally. And to deny that is simply to deny all of the evidence.
Well, I think we will have some
disagreements. So I prefer, and I'm glad that there are things that I can do in this country, but there are also trends in this country, and I think one of the real tragedies of the Americans is that they don't believe that tyranny can come to this country. They don't believe that, and in a way, much of it has already happened.
It is. I mean, if you listen to
like Grider, who will tell the people.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy William Grider, is that his name? Who wrote Globalization is What Ready or Not?
No, what's his name? Not Gardel. The name will come to me. Anyway,
in any case, I mean, that's his point, is that this country, people don't realize what's happened.
No,
Gore Vidal, he's a very intelligent person he is in the power nexus, in that he's from...
He was, I think.
No, in the sense that he hobnobs with these people. He hobnobs with these people. And here's a person who has really been very concerned at the undermining of the Constitution of the United States for a long time. And this is not extreme right-wing. I mean, there's a right-wing element in this country that has been talking about this, conspiracy theories and all this. Where's the conspiracy? I mean, where it's blatant. I don't see any conspiracy. Anybody that has an ounce of brains, all they have to do is look around them and wonder why. Wonder why when they go to the store, they're buying things they've been programmed to buy.
What you are doing, interestingly, is really from the perspective of one who has lived in the other world, who has lived with less freedom.
So 10 years I spent in the Muslim world.
10 years in exile, it's not 50 years that somebody else living in Pakistan or some other part of the so-called Muslim world is living. So freedom from our perspective, which I am offering here, may have a different meaning. Here, you have had the excesses. You have been fed and bred on all of these freedoms that we take to be granted. And therefore you have come to the point of taking a view that the abuses
I mean,
are
Doctor, I
overwhelming.
feel that's an unfair assessment, and I'll tell you why. Because I have lived in the Muslim world, and I lived in Algeria, I've lived in Morocco, I've lived in the Middle East, I've traveled in many parts of the world, and I've seen the bad side and I've seen the good side. And all I am saying is that I think that outside of war zones and outside of terrible places, I think the tragedies of much of the Muslim world are the Muslims themselves. And I think that constantly blaming the governments and blaming the tyrannies, that's just a poor excuse. I mean, I think that we need to stop doing that. And I think that the Americans as well. I think that blaming government for all these problems and whining about all these things. No, I think that the American people have to take responsibility for themselves.
Absolutely.
I think we have to stop supporting the forces in this country that are
Yes.
undermining,
Yes.
quote-unquote, democracy in this country,
Well,
because they're undemocratic forces. They're forces that are bent on manipulating people, and they're multinational, they're supranational.
Yes.
They don't hold allegiance to any country. They have no sense of patriotism. They have no sense of love of the people that they come
No,
from.
I think you're pointing out, things which are factual, with concerns which are factual. Chomsky has written so much about any of these issues. I mean, even the idea that America is the biggest sort of rogue nation now in his argument, and he's pointing out this, power-driven policies of our country which are tied to the economics, which is fine. Now, looking at Islam, which is facing these ideological challenges and challenges of more new ideas that will come. How do you assess the capacity of Islam to come out, victorious, quote unquote, in this ideological war, when you see that, in fact, there is worsening due to our insistence only to form rather than to substance?
Well, I would say, one, that the Islam itself is the only moral force. And I really believe this. It is the only moral force that is not spent. And as for the Muslims, that's another matter. I don't want to bring the Muslims into this. And I don't think that is a cliche. I think it's the truth. I think that Christianity has a power. It has a moral power. It has truth.
Enormous moral
yes,
power.
And it has truth in it. And I think Judaism has moral force and moral power, and it has truth in it. And I think that most of the world religions, including Hinduism and Buddhism, have truth in them and have moral power. But I would say that there are so many elements within those traditions that are no longer congruous with the modern world, with what we know today. I think to believe in Christianity today is, in a sense, to surrender my own intellectual and rational understanding of the world that I live in. And I think there would be Christians who would say, exactly, that's what you have to do. You have to make that leap of faith. But what I'm saying is, surrendering it in the worst form. In other words, that I'm expected to believe certain things that I can't believe in them. Not just because they're no longer rationally acceptable for me to believe, but because they have been disproven through very radical intellectual research and discovery. But I would say that Islam, and to put it in horrible postmodern terms, I would say that the world religions have been deconstructed. But I would say that Islam, true Islam,
is preserved.
It is preserved.
Right. No, that I
and they do have a problem there. They're attempting to do it. They've attempted to do it with the Hadith literature. The Quran, though, they have a real problem. They're trying to now create doubt about the validity of the sources of the Quran, etc., etc. But deal with the text.
Yeah. Now, I think now you bring me to sort of closure on this, because I think as we sit here now, how do you see our interaction or relationship with people from other faiths, especially Jews and Christians, who also have these concerns.
Yeah.
I mean, you will agree with me that they have
They have
similar
those concerns, absolutely.
I mean, for instance, the relations between Jews and Muslims, they have been so strained.
They're strained,
which is really unnecessary, because there is much of an ideological sort of.
Well, there is, and I hate that word, but
well, again,
there is
that word that you don't agree
there
with
is a difference that's pretty profound. It's
that
deep.
is to the finality of the prophethood. We agree with that.
Also, I think their understanding of God. I mean, I think that the Jewish understanding of God, technically they believe in one God, but I think if you go into their text, there's a lot of anthropomorphism that Muslims would reject. I think my basic take on it, I think we have to respect, and this is the Quranic picture, we have to respect other traditions, and I would include in that Hinduism, Buddhism, Shintoism, all of the wisdom traditions of the world. There's benefit in that. The Quran has a beautiful verse in which it says, "What benefits people remains in the earth."
Yes.
And I think that the fact that those religions have remained in the earth is because there's benefit in them. If there wasn't benefit being derived, they wouldn't be here. Yeah. Are they the total truth? Do any one of them have the total truth? No. I don't believe that. I think Islam is the total truth, and that's why I'm committed to the Islamic tradition. And I would like to be able to offer, to present to other people of other traditions the possibility of even examining the proposition that there's no God but Allah and that Muhammad is the messenger of God. Just to examine the proposition as a possibility. But on the other hand, I recognize that it is a wisdom of God that there are various peoples on the planet, and they need to be honored and have their dignity, and we should respect them. And Muslims are told to defend other faiths. That we're told to defend the Jews from persecution, defend the Christians from persecution, not persecute them, to actually defend them.
Especially the relationship now with the Jews is become so strained because of the political
of
question.
Palestine.
But as you look back in history, the relationship, I mean, at least the Jews were...
the Jews used it. It was actually part of the Jewish liturgy in Morocco to pray for the Muslims. The rabbis dictated that because they said the victory of the Muslims meant security for Judaism, and the defeat of the Muslims meant a threat to the security of Judaism. So the Jews used to pray for Muslims for victory. And if you read Kohler's book on Jewish theology that was taught at the Jewish Theological Seminary in Massachusetts at the turn of the century, he said very clearly that that rabbinical tradition teaches that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a vehicle of God. So they actually traditionally believed that. They saw him as a part of providence. They didn't see him as evil, but they did not accept the finality of his messengership because they believed that the Messiah was to come to them, and that would be the... We believe Jesus was the Messiah. They missed the boat. And Jesus was the Messiah. And that's why the Muslims are always amazed at Jews and Christians, because one, we name our children Moses. I've met so many Palestinians named Musa. I mean, what an amazing thing for a Palestinian to name his child Musa after the prophet of the Jews. And yet, have you ever met an Israeli named Muhammad? No. And Rabin's wife, Leah Rabin, because she knew who killed her husband, said, I would rather my children marry Palestinians than some Israelis. Right? So it's rare to see a type of unbiased...
Right, but the historical interaction, you just comment on that a little bit of Jews within Islam. How do you see it, or what is your reading on that?
Well, if you look historically, there are some black periods, but I think in relation to the overall tradition, the Muslim record of the treatment of Jews is extraordinary. It really is. It is extraordinary. The few black periods that existed were always condemned by scholars. The brave scholars like Sidi Ahmed Zarruq from Morocco, when the Watasid kingdom began to persecute the Jews because of the positions that they had achieved during the Marinid period, Beni Marin, they had become ministers. And the Watasiya, who were ministers of Beni Marin, they actually overthrew the government, claiming that they'd let the Jews get too powerful. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq was the only mufti of Fez, the legal jurist, that refused to go along with that and said the Jews are people of Dhimma, we have to protect them, their synagogues are protected. So you do have some black periods, but they were condemned by the righteous scholars, and history has testified that the righteous scholars were on the right side. When Spain fell, where did the Jews go? They went to Morocco and they went to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire built for them synagogues. There are synagogues to this day in Bosnia that were built by Ottomans. I mean, this is the way the Jews were treated in the Muslim world. For 2,000 years, almost 2,000 years, they were persecuted by the Romans and the Christians. And yet the Muslims have an extraordinary record. And the Jews that I have met, and I've met some very upright and honest Jews that will testify to that truth. I had a professor at San Jose State University, Mira Zuzman, who is a Jewish woman. She's an anthropologist, and she said that she owes her existence to the Muslims because she's a Sephardic Jew, and it was the Muslims that protected her people to flee from the Inquisition. So there are Jews that will recognize that. And in this country, some of the most vociferous voices now against the Israeli aggression, against the impoverished Palestinian people, are Jewish people. And that's the truth. I mean, the Pacifica Radio is one of the few radio stations where they really do talk about what's going on in Palestine and explain the aggression. Most of these people are of Jewish background. People like Dennis Bernstein and these people, they're Jewish people. And to see these people as evil, to demonize them, is just, it's a terrible thing. It's a horrible thing. Muslims, anti-Semitism, there's no room for anti-Semitism in Islam.
Yeah. No, but I think some Muslims somehow or the other go back to the Quran and validate their craziness of never trusting the Jews or hating the Jews or fighting them or killing them. I mean, what sort of authority do they have to do that?
Well, there are definitely verses in the Quran in which the Jews are condemned. But there are verses in the Bible where the Jews are condemned. The Jews condemn themselves in their own book. They talk about how they treated their prophets, and that's exactly what the Quran is doing. It's confirming the Bible. And in fact, that's a testimony to the honesty of the Jews in relating their tradition, because they do say they did terrible things to their prophets. And so the Quran condemns that and tells them the way you redeem yourselves is accept the prophets and accept the final prophet. So that's a message to the Jews. But on the other hand, the Quran leaves that option open to them. If you don't want to accept the prophet, not only can you live under us, but we will protect you. And not only that, Muslim men are given the right to marry Jewish women. Now, how can a religion that considers every Jew evil permit a Muslim man to marry a Jewish woman, to love that woman, because the Quran says the whole purpose of marriage is rahmah and mawadda, is mercy and love. So if you have a Jewish wife, you're supposed to show love and mercy to her, and vice versa. And she's going to raise your children. And in Islamic law, if there's a divorce, the children are raised by the Jewish mother.
And the Prophet.
So how can we demonize a people by that? But there are verses in the Quran that remind us that the people that have the most animosity towards Islam are the Jewish people. That doesn't mean every Jewish person. The Quran speaks in generalization.
The occasion of the Prophet's own experience. Also.
But we can see clearly that there are Jewish elements within the media. Every Muslim feels the sting and arrows of these outrageous attacks by media that is often biased, and they have an agenda. There's no doubt about that, and I don't think, again, it's a conspiracy. I mean, I just look at the people writing the news articles. But on the other hand, you also have Haaretz, which is a Jewish newspaper. Haaretz in Israel condemned the F-16 bombings in editorials. Condemned the Israeli government for using F-16s. So I think within the Jewish community...
Within the Quran, though, there is also mention in an honorable way of people of the book.
People of the book, there's a verse in the Quran that says if you trust them with... there are people amongst the people of the book, if you entrust them with a little bit of wealth, you have to keep on them to make sure you get it back. But there's others, if you give them a whole bunch of wealth, they'll be trustworthy with it, which indicate they're human beings. Yeah. There's good people and bad people.
Well, on that note, thank you. We had a roundabout around the Muslim world and world of ideas. And hopefully we'll come back
All right. Well,
and talk to you
thank
again.
you for having
Thank you.
me.